All right, this morning we continue our series through the book of Hebrews. Jesus is better. By now you're familiar with the context of the passage, but I'll recite it anyway. It's written to a group of first century Jewish Christians who are facing a level of persecution, both from Jews and Romans. And so, because of this, returning to Judaism appears to provide a level of safety. It looks like if they go back to the old way under Judaism, then they can begin to avoid some of the persecution that they've been facing up to this point. But the author is going to urge his audience time and time and time again that Jesus is better. You cannot go back. There is nowhere else to turn. Those other things seem like they may be a viable option, but in reality, we're going to see today, those things have been done away with. Those things have been annulled. Now what is left is Christ the King, Christ the High Priest. That is how we come to God. The author is going to accomplish this task of convincing us that Jesus is better throughout this book with a two-pronged approach. You see them on the banners back behind me. First, he's going to expound on the identity of Jesus. And this is what he says in chapter 1. He's the author of the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. Everything that it means to be God, Jesus is. Therefore, there is no other way to commune with God, to go to God, to draw near to God, other than Jesus, because he is God. There are no other viable options. Number two, live in light of that truth. Jesus is God, and so he is better, so let us run the race before us with endurance, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith. So two pillars. One, Jesus is better because of who he is. Number two, live like it by keeping your eyes, your gaze set on him. And so that's what we want to do today as we come to this word. We want to set our gaze on Jesus in Hebrews chapter 7. And we want to see everything that God has for us here. We want to see all of how Jesus is described, all of how his work is made known to us. And my prayer is that we would behold the glory of God in this word. He has used this two-pronged approach so far over the last couple of weeks to convince us of a few things. First, in Hebrews chapters 1 and 2, the author sets out to convince us that Jesus is better than the angels, right? There are no other mediators between God and man. Jesus is Son of God, Jesus is the Son of Man, and thus he is the only one that can go between us and God. We do not need angels to help us span the gap that exists between us. We do not need a ladder of divine beings or semi-divine beings to help us get there. Jesus is the ladder. Jesus is the one who brings us to God. Number two, in Hebrews 3 through 4, the author has presented Jesus as better than Moses because he is a better kind of deliverer. He has given his people a new kind of rest that they could not have understood when seeing that the rest was going to be fulfilled in a land. Now we have something that is far better. And then in Hebrews chapter 5 through chapter 10, Jesus is presented as better than Aaron and better than the Levitical priesthood, since he is the king priest who is eternal, faithful, and merciful, and who provides a better sacrifice. And that's where we are today, right here in the middle of this 6-chapter-long argument. Now, chapter 7 is in itself a whole and distinct unit. In fact, some believe that this passage was written by the author of Hebrews as a short homily or a short sermon that he delivered before. And so in the course of writing the book of Hebrews, he decided, man, this is a really good place to put this thing that I've previously written. So it is in itself a distinct piece, but despite being a self-contained unit, it is a vital piece of the larger argument of chapters 5 through 10. And so we're going to start just by reading a good chunk of the passage. Now let me warn you, we are dealing with 19 verses in the book of Hebrews today. We have not dealt with a chunk that large throughout this sermon series, and there's a really good reason for that. It is because it is not easy to get through 19 verses on time. So I apologize in advance. Miss Joy is gone, so she didn't hear that. But anyway, I'm going to try not to go over, but we do have 19 verses, so we're not going to get to look at every verse. We're going to have to kind of gloss over just a few, looking at general truths. But I do want to start by reading this for us. The book of Hebrews, chapter 7, verse 1. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. And to him Abraham apportioned a tenth of everything. He is first, by translation of his name, King of Righteousness. And then he is also King of Salem, that is, King of Peace. He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever. See how great this man was, to whom Abraham the patriarch gave a tenth of the spoils. Now those descendants of Levi who received the priestly office have a commandment in the law to take tithes from the people, that is, from their brothers, though these also are descended from Abraham. But this man, who does not have his descent from them, received tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. It is beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior. In the one case, tithes are received by mortal men, but in the other case, by one of whom it is testified that he lives. One might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him. Now, if perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need would there have been for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek rather than one named after the order of Aaron? For there is a change in the priesthood, or for when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well. For the one of whom these things are spoken belonged to another tribe, from which no one has ever served at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah, and in connection with that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. This becomes even more evident when another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek, who has become a priest not on the basis of a legal requirement concerning bodily descent, but by the power of an indestructible life, for it is witnessed of him, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. For on the one hand, a former commandment is set aside because of its weakness and its uselessness, for the law made nothing perfect. But on the other hand, a better hope is introduced, through which we draw near to God. The award for understatement of the week goes to one commentator that I read that said this: "This text has sometimes been difficult to understand for some modern readers." As if when I read this text, I'm one of those few, right? But I think if we're honest this morning, this text is pretty strange, right? Like there's an argumentation style here that we don't understand. This is not how we would go about proving something. And then we're left with this big, huge question. Anybody want to guess what that question is? Who in the world is Melchizedek and why is he here? Right? Like, why does he throw him in here? Like, we've been having a lovely time talking about angels and Moses and Jesus and how he's better than all them, and then the Levitical priests, and like we understood, like, yeah, man, he's way better than the Levitical priests. And he's like, hey, yeah, you know that Melchizedek guy. It's like, wait a second. That feels out of left field, but he's warned us up to this point, right? Like, he's name-dropped Melchizedek a few times along the way. But then the question arises, why in the world would he base his argument on Melchizedek? What is it about Melchizedek that makes him want to take him and hold him forward as a reason of why Jesus is better? What does that have to do with anything? If you know much about first century literature too, Melchizedek was the subject of much, what I guess would be the equivalent of modern day fan fiction. They took Melchizedek, they saw Melchizedek in Genesis chapter 14. They wrote all kinds of crazy stuff about like the apocalypse of Melchizedek and all this other stuff that was supposed to happen. So this is a very strange character for him to pick up because he has some baggage too in the first century when the author of Hebrews writes this. The Qumran community, for instance, understood Melchizedek in a very strange way. But I think he does this here primarily, despite all of the baggage he may bring, because his audience was in need of a shift in their paradigm. What's a paradigm, you might ask? Well, think of your paradigm as a grid in your life into which you stuff all of your beliefs. You put everything you think and believe into this sort of grid with a particular shape. Now, the shape of your grid is going to impact how and where you put things, okay? Some truths aren't even going to fit into your paradigm, and you're left with a few options. First, you can just kind of try to shove them in there, and you end up trying to put a triangle in a round hole. I have a 1-year-old, and he still doesn't get that the triangle goes in the triangle hole, and the circle goes in the circle hole. It just doesn't fit. That's what we can try to do with our paradigms when something doesn't fit. Or we could ignore the data, just keep on living life as if this truth that we hear about doesn't exist. We can just reject it. Or we can adopt a whole new paradigm. We can adopt a new grid that takes into account all of the relevant data that we have. A great example of a failure to adjust one's paradigm is found in the industry, Kodak. How many of you heard of Kodak? Some of you younger folks have no clue who Kodak. You've heard of Kodak. You haven't heard of Kodak. That's what I thought. So some of you who are a little more seasoned think Kodak. Man, they were big stuff, right? And the younger folks are like, who's Kodak, right? You can kind of pick up where we're going with this one, huh? Formerly, Kodak was an industry leader. In 1996, they held 2/3 of the global market share for their industry, meaning they controlled 2/3 of all business in the world related to printed film. Okay? Their stock was around $90 a share, which in 1996 dollars, as I understand, is a lot of money. Their yearly revenue was around $16 million. Again, doesn't sound like much today. But in 1996 dollars, that's lots of money. Their total company worth was $31 billion, which in 1996 made them the 5th most valuable company in the world. Okay? To put that into context, the modern day 5th most valuable company is Microsoft. So that's the level that Kodak had sort of reached for a time. But during the late 90s and early 2000s, everything began to fall apart. The digital revolution came to the camera and film industry. To their credit, Kodak saw where the future was headed in a lot of ways, and they began to make some changes. They created a digital camera. They bought an internet photo sharing company called OPhoto way before Facebook ever existed, right? They're cutting edge. They invested billions of dollars in developing a whole line of digital cameras that could rival the quality of pictures taken by regular film cameras. And they even led the digital market in 2005, selling more digital cameras than any other company. But by 2012, Kodak filed for bankruptcy. What happened? How can a company fall so far in just 16 years? I mean, we're talking 1996 to 2012. We're talking top of the world in 1996 to bankruptcy in 2012. They never changed their paradigm. They saw nearly all of the facts that were coming up. They began to incorporate new technology. They branched out into lots of different fields, particularly the medical field that should have made them lots and lots of money, but they ended up tanking that. They failed to understand, however, that the picture industry had changed at its core. Scott Anthony of the Harvard Business Review said it well when he said, Kodak created a digital camera, invested in the technology, and even understood that photos would be shared online. And remember, that's before Instagram, that's before Facebook, that's before Twitter. Some of you, that was like back when God created the earth, right? Like we're talking way back here. But where they failed was in realizing that online photo sharing was the new business, not just a way to expand the printing business. Kodak never made the transition away from printed photos and to digital photos. They always viewed digital photos as serving a different end, serving the end of printed photos. Maintaining an old, outdated paradigm resulted in disaster for Kodak. It's a very dangerous thing. And it's even more dangerous when that old, outdated paradigm that people tend to hold on to is in how we relate to God. If it can tank a company, then it can certainly tank your life, holding on to a fouled paradigm. For the Jews in the first century, they were working with a paradigm created by the Old Testament law. Under the law, the priesthood represented sort of the sum total of what it meant to commune with God. This is how you went to God. This is how you related to God. So understandably, when the time came to shift paradigms, they had a hard time. Many were not ready. And so when persecution came, those who were clinging on to this old paradigm were tempted to fall back because the truths of the gospel weren't really fitting into their paradigm anyway. And so it just seemed easier to go back to what's comfortable and go back to what makes sense. But the nature of the gospel is such that one cannot simply plug new rules and new values into a pre-existing paradigm. The gospel demands a new kind of paradigm all its own if we are going to take into account all of the truths, all of the beliefs, all of the things that Jesus said he was, all of the things that Jesus did, if we're going to take those into account, there needs to be a new paradigm. Jesus simply will not fit in the old. And this is why when he's asked about why his disciples don't fast like the Pharisees or the disciples of John the Baptist, he says this: no one puts a piece of cloth on unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch tears away from the garment, and a worse tear is made. Neither is new wine put into old wineskins. If it is, the skins burst, and the wine is spilled, and the skins are destroyed. But new wine is put into fresh wineskins, and so both are preserved. The old and the new cannot exist side by side. And for the author of the book of Hebrews, Melchizedek and his priesthood set a biblical precedent for this new kind of paradigm that the Jews needed to pick up on. He sets the precedent for a major shift that is supposed to take place. And in Hebrews chapter 7, the author looks back at Genesis chapter 14, Psalm 110, and he sees Melchizedek as a type or a foreshadow of the coming Messiah, a king priest that sets the stage for a priesthood that is far superior than that of the Levitical priesthood. And he insists that the Jews should have seen this coming all along. This should not have taken them by surprise. A new kind of thing should have been expected all along, but they viewed the law as an end in itself, failing to understand that things were about to change at the core. In short, Melchizedek provides a mysterious shadow of the coming Messiah by introducing a superior priesthood and a better hope. What we're going to do today is pick that sentence apart in three different sections. And so look with me, if you will, the top of your notes on the back of the page. Melchizedek provides, first of all, a mysterious shadow of the coming Messiah. Now, in the first few verses of chapter 7, the author is going to sum up and interpret the Genesis account for us where Melchizedek appears. Now, we don't have time to necessarily go back and read a lot of the context there, so let me sum it up for you. In Genesis chapter 14, a group of kings got together, they formed a coalition, and they went and they took over several small cities. One of the cities that they took over happened to be where Lot, Abraham's nephew, lived. And so when Abraham heard of this, he was understandably a little bit upset. And so he took his army, he coupled that army with a couple of other kings in the area, and they went and got their stuff back and got their people back. And in the middle of all of this, right, so you've just got this military conflict, you've got Abraham rescuing Lot, and it's like, oh, this really touching story about, him going and rescuing his family. But in the middle of all this, Melchizedek just kind of shows up on the scene. And he appears as this sort of enigmatic figure with no known origin and no purpose. If you're familiar with the book of Genesis, you know people don't just show up without mommies and daddies, right? In the book of Genesis, this is quite odd. We usually have parents. We usually have the number of years that they lived. We usually have what they did. We usually have any kids that they maybe had. And then what do we hear about? And they died, repeated about 6,000 times in one chapter in the book of Genesis. We don't have that when it comes to Melchizedek. And the way Melchizedek is described is rather unique as well. It's not just that he doesn't have a genealogy listed, but looking back through the lens of the cross, all of a sudden the shadow cast by a blurry figure begins to come into focus. So let's look at Melchizedek here, a mysterious shadow of the coming Messiah. First of all, he's described as the king of righteousness. The author starts out by simply translating his name. It's the combination of two Hebrew words, Melech and Tzedek. So Melech means king, Tzedek means righteousness. It's pretty easy to see where the author of Hebrews comes along and says, king of righteousness, right? Not hard to get there. But in the Old Testament, many times, the name of a person speaks to that individual's character. And so for this man to be called king of righteousness likely pointed to his quality of life, pointed to him being an upright individual, okay? Next, Melchizedek is called a king of priests, or a king of peace. Now the author translates the title king of Salem. And Salem is from the same Hebrew root as the word shalom, typically translated as peace, but really it points to this bigger picture than simply peace. We tend to think of peace as sort of an absence of conflict. But in the Hebrew mindset, peace is not just an absence of conflict. It is also an idea of a completeness, a wholeness, things functioning as they're supposed to function, a general welfare that is enjoyed. And so this king is not like many kings who are after blood, who are after power or wealth or land. He is a king whose reign is marked by peace, an absence of violence and conflict, and the presence of completeness and wholeness. And it's fitting that these two virtues, righteousness and peace, mark this man because he's also a priest. And he's not just any priest. Look with me. He's a perpetual priest. Verse 3. He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever. Many get to this point and they say, aha, it was Jesus. It was pre-incarnate Jesus, right? And I'll admit, like when you read this, it sure sounds like that's what the author of Hebrews is kind of getting at first glance. And so it's a little bit troubling that he assigns some of these characteristics to Melchizedek. But it's important to note a couple of things about this passage. First of all, verse 3, the author says that Melchizedek resembles the Son of God. Not that he is the Son of God. And furthermore, the argument of Hebrews chapter 7 depends on Melchizedek and Jesus being two distinct people. Okay, the argument rests on that. If they're not two distinct people, then what the author is arguing for completely falls apart. Hence, Jesus is called another priest who arises in the likeness of Melchizedek. He's another one in that same line. And so I don't think this is talking about a pre-incarnate Christ, though I do see how people get there very easily. But the author of Hebrews is not being dishonest here, I don't think, when he says that Melchizedek has no father or no mother or no genealogy. So what in the world is he doing? Well, he's simply looking to Genesis chapter 14, and he realizes that this is nothing like the rest of the book of Genesis. We don't have a birthday. We don't hear about his mom and dad. We don't hear about his death. This is quite odd. We don't hear about any children. And thus, in some sense, this Melchizedek is a priest on into perpetuity because we never hear about his priestly lineage ending. And if you know anything particularly about Old Testament priests, we always know who their mommies and daddies are. Their dads have to be descended from Aaron, descended from the tribe of Levi. Their moms have to be a purebred Israel. Genealogies were a big deal for priests. But then this Melchizedek shows up with none of that. Now stop for a moment and think about this. Melchizedek is a king who is marked by righteousness and peace. He's also a priest of the Most High God, meaning he serves as a mediator between God the Most High and mankind. And as far as we know, as far as we can read in the book of Genesis, he has no beginning and no end, and thus there is no end to his priesthood because he is not cut off by the end of his life. Those of us who know Jesus can look at this and kind of begin to crinkle our eyebrow just a little bit. Like this seems a little fishy, like this Melchizedek character. But if this is all we had, in the back of our minds, we could be thinking that these parallels are pointing us to a type of Christ, but we couldn't know for sure. Thankfully, this isn't all we have. We have Psalm 110. So if you would, flip there with me. This is a Bible drill portion of the sermon. Flip to Psalm 110. We're going to read verses 1 through 4 together. This is a very clear messianic psalm. It's the most quoted psalm in the New Testament. Jesus himself even quotes from this. Psalm 110, beginning in verse 1. Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. The Lord sends forth from Zion your mighty scepter. Rule in the midst of your enemies. Your people will offer themselves freely on the day of your power in holy garments from the womb of the morning, and the dew of your youth will be yours. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Whoa. Now all of a sudden this Melchizedek character begins to make sense. It's like that moment in a movie where the twist is revealed and you think about all those loose ends that the producer has set up all along the way, and now we begin to get it. We see this picture. Melchizedek, this strange figure thrown into this obscure Old Testament passage for no apparent reason, is there to introduce us to a new kind of priesthood. It's a priesthood that is a forever kind of priesthood, as Psalm 110 calls it. And the Messiah is going to be this kind of priest. And this priesthood, according to the author of Hebrews, is going to be a superior priesthood to that of the Levites. That's found in chapter 7, verses 4 through 10. That's what the psalmist is talking about in Psalm 110. And that is where the author of Hebrews is going to aim his attention now. Look with me at verse 4. See how great this man was, to whom Abraham the patriarch gave a tenth of the spoils. With verse 4, the author announces the whole point of verses 4 through 10. Now, he's going to use some argumentation that doesn't really make a lot of sense to us. He's going to argue in a way that is not typical for us to argue today. But the way he sets this up means that we can get the big picture, namely verse 4. Look how great Melchizedek is. Look how awesome this guy is. And that's not where he wants us to stop. The implication is Melchizedek is great, not just because he is great. Melchizedek is great because his priesthood is great. Look how awesome Melchizedek's priestly office is. The author is going to prove this point by appealing to two different truths of Melchizedek. First of all, the first truth, the Melchizedekian priest is superior in his qualification. Read with me. Verse 5, and those descendants of Levi who receive the priestly office have a commandment in the law to take tithes from the people, that is, from their brothers, though these also are descended from Abraham. But this man who does not have his descent from them received tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. According to the law, the Levitical priest's qualification, like I've said, was based on their lineage. Not necessarily that individual's affinity for God or his desire for this particular role or his faithfulness. Priesthood depended on who your mom was, who your dad was, and whether or not you had one out of a list of like 100 or more physical blemishes that could disqualify you. If you had the right mom and the right dad and no blemishes, then guess what? You're a priest. Get after it. Like, here's your role. This is your job, assigned from birth. The law also allows the priesthood to take a tithe from the people, that is, take a tenth or 37%, depending on how you calculate that in the Old Testament, of what the people had, to take that tenth and to live off of that, to compensate them for their priestly duties. Thus, the giving of a tithe was the Israelites' way of saying, we acknowledge and understand your role, Mr. Priest, as our priest. God has chosen you to be a priest, to be a mediator between us, and so we give you this so you will be free to carry out your priestly duties, your priestly function. And so we give you this so you don't have to worry about a job on the side, so you could just worry about mediating between God and man. Now, this new kind of priesthood in the order of Melchizedek is different. First of all, it doesn't depend on lineage. Doesn't matter who your mom is, doesn't matter who the dad is. This Melchizedekian priesthood is independent of that. But look at this. The Melchizedekian priesthood is nonetheless valid. Abraham, the father of Israel, acknowledged the validity of the priesthood by giving a tenth of the spoils of war to this priest, this mysterious figure. You ever wonder why this guy named Melchizedek just shows up and Abraham's like, hey, buddy, you want a tenth of everything I have? Like, that's a little, anybody ever met somebody on the street and just decided to give them a tenth of everything? Hey, man, let me write you a check right now. We don't do that. Why did he do it? He did it to acknowledge his priesthood. Abraham himself put his stamp of approval on Melchizedek as a legitimate priest. And this is 550 years before the law was ever given. This is long before the Levitical priesthood. And so catch this. There's a priesthood that does not depend on lineage, that preceded the law, that was acknowledged by Abraham, the one who received the promise from God. And so this priesthood is superior in its qualification, in that it does not depend on the law, and that it, in fact, it precedes the law. It was acknowledged by Abraham, the father of the nation. So the Melchizedekian priesthood is superior in his qualification. Next, the Melchizedekian priest is superior in his duration. The major theme of why Jesus is better in the book of Hebrews, or in particular Hebrews chapter 7, is Jesus' eternality. That fact runs all the way through chapter 7, beginning very early, and in fact, later on, Jesus is going to be described like this. The former priests were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. But he holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. That's the whole point of chapter 7. Jesus' priesthood is better because as a Melchizedekian priest, he mediates forever, unhindered by death. Now, we don't have time to jump into that portion of the text. I need to leave something for Pastor Steve to preach next week. So I'll leave that out for this week. You're just going to have to trust me as we move on. But again, as I said before, I don't think the author intends for us to read this and understand Melchizedek as the one who lives for eternity. The author has pondered the book of Genesis. He's pondered the narrative. And he has seen in the fact that we have no genealogy with this priest as a mark that something new is coming. It's pointing us to a new kind of priest. It's pointing us to a priesthood through whom, or of whom, the type, Jesus will come in his lineage, kind of in the order of that kind of priest. So the Melchizedekian priesthood, is eternal, not Melchizedek himself. And because the priesthood is eternal, we have a better hope than the law of the old covenant. Verse 11 introduces the need for something new, right? Let's read it together. Verse 11, now if perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need would there have been for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek, rather than one named after the order of Aaron? The answer, of course, to this rhetorical question is there isn't. There would be no need for if the Levitical priesthood could bring about this perfection that the author is talking about. But it could not. And so we need another priest. Now the word perfection here is interesting. It's need a little bit of explanation. What is meant is not this sinless perfection while on earth. We find out in verses 18 through 19, the perfection talked about is the relationship between us and God. Look at verse 18 with me. For on the one hand, a former commandment is set aside because of its weakness and uselessness. For the law made nothing perfect. There it is again from verse 11. But on the other hand, a better hope is introduced, through which we draw near to God. So notice the things that are contrasted here. This imperfect old way and this new way to draw near to God. So the juxtaposition of those two things tells us that the imperfect was an imperfect way to God, and the perfect that we now have is a perfect way of relating to God. It's a new kind of drawing near. In other words, the end goal is a perfect drawing near to God, and the Levitical priesthood could never accomplish that. The Levitical priesthood could never provide us with perfect mediation, with perfect contact with God. The old paradigm simply cannot fit what we need and what God desires to do. As George Guthrie says there in your notes, this assertion in the form of a question proclaims, since God's ultimate goal of establishing eternal relationship between himself and people could not be attained through the Levitical priesthood, there was still a need for a priesthood to arrive that could bring that perfection. Thankfully now, our new king priest in the order of Melchizedek has provided a new and better hope for us. He has succeeded in doing what the Levitical priesthood could not. And he has done this in a few ways. First of all, by setting aside the old imperfect way. The Old Testament law is from God, and it is totally good. So please, at this point, don't hear me disparaging the law in any way. It is equally the Word of God as the book of Hebrews that we are studying from right now. But the law in itself was at best imperfect towards what God's ultimate desired end is. Okay, the law was good, but it could not accomplish what God ultimately desired to accomplish. The blood of bulls and goats could never actually pay for sins. It could at best temporarily cover those sins over. The presence of God was always going to be just out of reach from the people because the old law could not usher them into the presence of God with confidence like Jesus Christ. The Levitical priest was at best a flawed mediator. He was a sinful man like the other sinful men. But the new Melchizedekian priest has set all of this aside. And in doing so, he has established a new, enduring priesthood. Look with me at verses 13 through 17. For the one of whom these things are spoken belonged to another tribe, from which no one has ever served at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah. And in connection with that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. This becomes even more evident when another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek, who has become a priest not on the basis of a legal requirement concerning bodily descent, but by the power of an indestructible life. For it is witnessed of him, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Get this. This is something that we tend to miss when we're talking about Jesus as a great high priest. Jesus was not qualified to be a Levitical priest. Jesus could not be a Levitical priest. He was from the tribe of Judah. He totally missed that. That is why he is a priest of the Melchizedekian order, a totally different kind, a kind that we knew we needed, but one that is called in verse 15, another. In Greek, there are two specific words that can be used to talk about another. The first one is allos. It's another of the same kind. So I'm a man. There's a man sitting on this row of chairs over here. He is another. He is an allos man. But the author of the book of Hebrews is careful to use the word heteros, meaning another of a different kind. Jesus is a heteros priest, not an allos priest. He's totally different than this Levitical priesthood. He's a whole other kind. He is one that is established not on the basis of a legal requirement, not determined by the law, but one that is established by an indestructible life. In other words, a life that cannot be stamped out. You all remember that from last week? Easter, Jesus rising from the dead. Because of this, our priest can do things that the Levitical priests simply could not. Most importantly, he can intercede on our behalf continually, day after day, for all of eternity, and on the basis of his own merit. Because of this, our priest can accomplish final and eternal reconciliation. Final and eternal reconciliation. The hope we have in our new kind of priest is better because of what it accomplishes. Verse 11 alluded to it by mentioning what the old priest couldn't accomplish, namely perfection. But now we have a new kind of hope based on a new kind of priest through which we draw near to God in a new kind of way. This is a whole new paradigm. This is a whole new thing. It does not fit within the boundaries of the law. It does not fit within the boundaries of the Levitical priesthood. And through it, we draw near with confidence, without fear, trusting our high priest who will always be there. In doing this, verse 18 says that he set aside the former commandment. The word translated as set aside could also be translated as annulled. In other words, it's gone. It has been done away with, and it has been replaced with something brand new and something far superior that can do what the old never could. In comparison to the new way, the old is referred to as weak, meaning it lacked in power. It couldn't accomplish something. It's also called useless. Now, the law was not useless for what it was intended to do, but for what God's ultimate desire was and is for us. God's ultimate desire is that a people from every tribe, from every tongue, from every nation would draw near to him through the work of a new kind of priest, a whole new kind of king priest, the King of righteousness, the King of peace, our perpetual priest, Jesus Christ. And so the old paradigm has to be expunged. Jesus does not fit, and he cannot. The gospel demands its own kind of grid, and Melchizedek sets us up to understand that by providing us with this mysterious shadow of a coming Messiah, by introducing a superior priesthood to us, and by pointing us to a better hope that superior priesthood provides. Now the author of the book of Hebrews wants his readers to get on board. They must understand that they have to ditch this old paradigm. They have to leave behind the Levitical priesthood. They cannot begin to turn back to it whenever life gets hard, whenever people start persecuting them. There is nowhere else to turn. The old has been annulled. The Levitical priesthood cannot accomplish what you need. The only thing that can accomplish what you need is the Melchizedekian priest, Jesus. There is nothing to return to. And I think this passage challenges us today at the same level. We may not be tempted to look back at the Levitical priesthood as the good old days. Anybody wake up this morning and think to yourself, man, it sure would just be easier to drag this here goat to church, right? But if we're honest, we are all tempted to cling to an old paradigm. We're all guilty of living and functioning according to a paradigm that is not gospel-shaped. So many areas of our lives go seemingly unimpacted by the gospel message. But there's a problem with this. And originally, this is where my sermon ended as of Friday night. This is where I presented the gospel. But I prayed and I said, God, this is not easy. How do we change our paradigm? Because after all, if the paradigm is the way that I view the world around me, through what lens am I going to be observing my paradigm? Through the paradigm, right? It's hard for a paradigm to be critical of itself. And that's going to result in huge blind spots around us. And so I prayed, and I believe God laid these 6 questions on my heart. Y'all know me. I'm not weird. I don't claim these as direct divine revelation or anything like that. But as I prayed, I do feel that these are 6 questions that the Lord would have us ask ourselves as those who need a paradigm shift, who are in drastic need of a gospel-shaped grid to determine how we live our lives. So these aren't your notes, but don't worry, I'm not charging any extra for today. I want to write them down briefly because I have 2 minutes and 36 seconds to give you 6 questions. So here we go. Question number 1, on what basis do you relate to God? Now, before you jump and throw out the canned answer of Jesus, I want you to stop and really think about that question this week. When you go to God in prayer, when you approach Him in His Word, when you approach Him in worship here, on what basis do you come? Are you coming on the basis of your own merit, or are we coming on the basis of our great high priest, Jesus Christ? A couple of follow-up questions to help you discern this. Help you answer that question. Are you less likely to come to the Lord in prayer or worship or reading the Word following a significant moral failure? Are you stubborn and slow to come and repent? If so, you may be coming on your own merit. In your time of worship, is it more joyful when you've been good this past week? Are you more satisfied and happier about the gospel when you think you have done your part? If so, you may be coming on your own merit. You may not have a gospel-shaped paradigm. Does failure plague you with shame to the point that you just don't even feel like drawing near to God? That you think, what's the point? Let me get myself cleaned up a little bit before I go back? If so, you may not be operating from a gospel paradigm. Question number 2, how regularly do you draw near to God? A gospel paradigm acknowledges the fact that we as individuals are weak. And we are powerless to face temptation in this world. And we are powerless to be witnesses for Christ in this world without the aid of the Spirit. So do you feel like you need God? Does that drive you to your knees regularly? Do you say with the psalmist, as a deer pants for streams of water, so pants my soul for you, O God? If you seldom find yourself there, you may not be operating from a gospel paradigm. Number 3. This is a big one. How do you feel about God's church? I don't mean how do you feel about the buildings. I don't mean how do you feel about our church leadership. I don't mean how you even feel about the church as a whole, sort of the whole group of people. I mean, how do you feel about that person sitting next to you in the pew? Or the person in front of you? Or at the far opposite corner from you so you don't have to see or talk to them, or that one that comes to a different service so that you can avoid them? Do you have beef that you refuse to settle? Do you harbor bitterness and anger towards a brother or sister in this congregation? Would you rather maintain your pride and let your brother or sister languish and allow the body of Christ to exist as a limping, shattered version of what it's intended to be? If you value that above the glory of God, then you are not operating from a gospel paradigm. Number 4, how are you fitting into God's mission? Do you leave this place week in and week out intentionally with this gospel drive that sends you out on mission to make disciples and evangelize the lost and live your life for Jesus? Or do you leave here more concerned about lunch? Do you leave apathetic? Do you leave numb? If so, you're not working from a gospel paradigm. Number 5, this one hit me hardest. As an employee, how do you gauge success? Let me back up. How do you gauge success? As an employee, do you gauge success by tasks completed and paychecks earned and promotions given? As a student, do you gauge success by grades that you make or extracurriculars that you're a part of or that guy or girl who happened to look at you this week? This is where it got me. As a parent, do you gauge your success by the accomplishment of your kids? By giving them everything you never had? By getting them into a good college or keeping them out of trouble? Oh. I get so proud of myself because my 2-year-old said a new word. And I go around telling people, I'm like, did y'all hear the way she put that sentence together? Isn't that awesome? She's so clever, must be me. That is not a gospel-shaped paradigm. And it is dangerous. And it will kill you. And it will kill your joy. And it will rob this church. Number 6, how will you respond to God's word? Presented with your need today for a paradigm shift, will you change it? Will you let the gospel have say in and over your life and shape your grid and the way that you approach God, engage success, and love one another and parent your children? Or will you be like Kodak, presented with all the relevant information, simply cram some pithy Christian sayings into your grid, maybe even shove in a couple of Christian-type events into your calendar? Will you begrudgingly discard the gospel truths altogether when they don't fit? Will you turn away? If you're here today and you don't know Christ, let me tell you, He knows you. He knows who you are, and He knows what you've done, and He loves you just the same. He bids you to come just as you are. He doesn't want a cleaned up, polished up, dressed up version of you. He wants you as you are. Will you trust Him today? Will you allow Him to change your paradigm away from the paradigm of the world that says that money and wealth and cars and clothes and sex is where the good life is found? Will you let the gospel shape you? He will be here waiting whenever the world leaves you wanting. If you're a believer, brothers and sisters, know that we all have a paradigm that is out of whack. We all have a skewed grid. How will we respond to the word? Will we allow the gospel to shape us? Or are we going to settle playing church? We're going to settle for a flawed paradigm that hinders the joy that God wants us to have in a closer walk with Him. Let me urge you, brothers and sisters, take these questions. Think on them this week. Read Hebrews chapter 7. Understand the need for a whole new paradigm. Understand the gospel lays claim to your life. Understand that the Word of God has authority not just over your belief system, but over the way you live your life, the way you work, the way you play, the way you parent. And brothers and sisters, let's keep pressing on. Let's keep engaging with God and with one another so that we can grow. Let us keep crying out for the Lord's help and seeking Him in His Word and allow Him to transform our life according to the gospel. Let's pray. Father, it is hard not to be humbled by the truth that we have blind spots that we can't even evaluate properly. Father, there are areas of our lives that we keep shielded from your word, that we guard from the gospel, that we do not want you to change. Our grids are comfortable. But Father, you know the gospel doesn't allow that. You know that you want to shift it. You know that you want to change us. And so we pray. We pray that your Spirit would apply this word to our hearts. We pray that our worldview, that our grid, that our paradigm would begin to be transformed by the gospel. I pray for any here who don't know you, Father. I pray that you would help them to see that the paradigm of the world is leading only to death and dissatisfaction, but the paradigm of the gospel is the way to lasting joy and intimacy with you. Father, I pray that you would impress this word on our hearts, transform us this week according to the mighty power of your Spirit working in our lives. And we ask this in Jesus' name and for his glory alone. Amen.